Hello everyone, and welcome back to the Ultimate Neo Geo review here on Player 1 Start. Well, this is finally it. We are on to the last part. In this video, I'm going to talk about the legacy of SNK and the Neo Geo. So if you're just arriving here at the end for the first time, I would definitely recommend going back and watching at least the first part of this review before watching this part, because it should help you make more sense out of what I'm going to talk about in this video. With that said, as I remind you to click that like and subscribe button and the bell icon to be notified when I make future posts, let's go ahead and get started. When the Neo Geo AES initially released in Japan, it was only meant for rental or in use in hotels. However, SNK quickly began selling the system through stores when customer response indicated that people were willing to spend the money on the home version of the console. When the Advanced Entertainment System launched in the United States, it debuted at $599, coming with 2 controllers and a game, either Baseball Stars Professional or NOM 1975. The console would sell very modestly due to its high price, but because it shared the same hardware as the arcade versions, there was little expense to port the games to the home system. Besides the initial cost of the console at launch, each additional game would retail for at least $200, which as of 2022 would be almost $400 each. To help combat the high cost of entry into the Neo Geo market, SNK came up with a solution using CDs. The compact disc, which was seen as the future of video games rather than cartridges, had a large advantage over cartridges being several times cheaper to produce. The Neo Geo CD would debut on September 9th, 1994 in Japan, and would feature the same games that were on the Neo Geo MVS and AES. However, CDs would retail for much less than the cartridges, retailing for around $50 to $80. The Neo Geo CD console can also play audio CDs, and all of them have no region lock, allowing you to play any region's game on the system. The Neo Geo CD also came with a control pad instead of a joystick like the AES. However, the original AES joystick can be used with all 3 Neo Geo CD models. The problem with this system is that it came a bit too late, not even launching in the United States until January 15, 1996, well into the next generation of home video games. One review in late 1995 noted that SNK's reputation for fun games made the system worth a look. However, they argued their failure to upgrade the Neo Geo system with 3D capabilities would keep them from producing any truly cutting-edge games. Overall, that review ended with giving the system a 1.5 out of 5 stars. About a year after its launch, the system would be discontinued. As their hardware was beginning to look aged in the arcades as well, SNK developed a new system known as the Hyper Neo Geo 64. This system would feature a 64-bit CPU, as well as 3D graphics capability, and they would release it in 1997 as the successor to the MVS within the Neo Geo family. However, the initial launch of the system was met with very mixed reception. One of the first games released for the system, Samurai Showdown 64, was not well received by gamers and fans of the franchise. SNK would go on to produce 7 different titles for the system, but none of them became a huge hit, leading them to discontinue the system altogether in 1999. It was stated that if the system was successful, that they would have created a home version just like they did with the AES and MVS. However, that never materialized. SNK would continue to try to move their brand forward by making the Neo Geo Pocket, which is a monochrome handheld video game system that was released by SNK on October 28, 1998 in Japan. This handheld would launch later in Europe, however, the initial system would never make it to the United States. The Neo Geo Pocket is considered to be an unsuccessful console due to lower than expected sales that resulted in its discontinuation the following year in 1999.
It's here! The revolutionary Neo Geo Pocket Color! With 16-bit power, revolving joystick, 146 color display, 6 cool styles. The graphics will blow you away. Neo Geo Pocket, way ahead of the game.
However, the system was immediately followed up by the Neo Geo Pocket Color. This handheld debuted March 16th of 1999 in Japan and hit store shelves in North America that August. The system started off with strong sales in both the US and Japan. Part of that is credited to its launch lineup, which had a record-breaking 14 titles launching with the handheld. However, that success was short-lived as sales immediately began to taper off with a lack of retail support in the United States. Part of this was due to lack of communication with third-party developers by SNK's American management, as well as the popularity of Nintendo's Pokémon franchise that was burning up the sales charts on the Game Boy and Game Boy Color. There was also rumors of Nintendo's next system being close to a Super Nintendo handheld, which made the Neo Geo Pocket Color begin to look dated almost at launch. Around this time, after having released 3 systems that were commercial failures, SNK was in financial trouble. That same year, in 1999, Neo Geo World Tokyo Bayside was opened in Pallet Town, Tokyo. It would be equipped with attractions such as Ferris wheels and roller coasters. In the end, the amusement park business would be a huge failure that wasted management's time and energy as well as the company's resources. Add to that in the late 1990s that the boom of 2D fighting games, which SNK had been using as a money-printing machine since the early 90s, was on the decline. SNK's attempts to break out of the 2D fighting game genre had also been unsuccessful, and because the company's structure was designed to rely on income from these failing franchises, the company kept sinking further into debt. In January of 2000, SNK's poor financial status led to its acquisition by AES, a company known for its pachinko machines. Instead of developing video games using SNK's intellectual properties, AES manufactured pachinko machines that featured popular series such as The King of Fighters. That year, Capcom had agreed to create a series of fighting games featuring both companies' fighting game characters, known as Capcom vs. SNK. However, the agreement left most of the profits with Capcom due to the fact that they would both develop and publish the game. With the declining revenues of the video game industry, SNK would close all American operations on June 13, 2000. The company sold its distribution rights in North America for the MVS arcade system, as well as its American localizations of some console releases, to outside companies. With low morale and an unclear future, many of the company's employees left their jobs. Some would go and join rival Capcom, and some banded together to form a new company known as Brezasoft, which would continue to develop Neo Geo games such as The King of Fighters 2001. Seeing the end of SNK, founder Akechi Kawasaki left SNK along with other executives to found a company named Playmore on August 1st, 2001. Then, on October 22, 2001, SNK filed for bankruptcy and put the rights to SNK's intellectual property up for sale. Licenses for SNK's game production and development rights for its franchises were sold to several other companies. Some of these included Eolith, which produced the King of Fighters franchise between 2001 and 2002, as well as Mega Enterprise, which would go on to create Metal Slug 4. It was around this time when the Neo Geo Pocket Color was officially discontinued and unsupported, being the last console that SNK would produce. Despite its failure, the Neo Geo Pocket Color has been regarded as a highly influential system. Many acclaimed games were released for the system, such as SNK vs. Capcom, Match of the Millennium, King of Fighters R2, and other quality arcade titles derived from SNK's MVS and AES. Many praised its arcade-style microswitch clicky joystick, as well as the system's display and 40-hour battery life. It really seemed like the end of SNK was at hand. However, in an effort to regain control of SNK, Kawasaki's new company Playmore successfully bid and was awarded SNK's IP rights on October 30th, 2001. The company then began to bolster its assets and rehire former SNK employees. To re-establish its presence in the gaming market, Playmore acquired Brezasoft and some of its former SNK developers, including Japan-based Neo Geo developer Noise Factory. SNK also acquired Sun Amusement, which was a Japanese commercial games distributor, to help them get a presence back in the gaming market. International offices were established in South Korea, Hong Kong, and the United States under the name SNK Neo Geo. On July 7, 2003, all of the acquired entities were consolidated into SNK Playmore. That was after they had retrieved the rights from Aruze to use the name SNK. Previously, ADK, or Alpha Denshi, was a third-party company that had been heavily associated with SNK since the late 1980s. However, also in 2003, SNK would purchase ADK shortly after it filed for bankruptcy. Even after acquiring back the IP rights from Aruze, they continued to use some of those IPs to make money, and that didn't sit well with Ikeichi Kawasaki. In October of 2002, they would sue Aruze for infringing on their acquired intellectual property rights. The lawsuit would end in January of 2004, with an Osaka District Court favoring SNK Playmore, awarding it 5.64 billion yen, or $44.9 million. Once they had arranged themselves into SNK Playmore, they went on the warpath, creating an injunction against a group of 4 different companies, who were then illegally manufacturing hundreds of AES cartridges. However, in the wake of the new company, that same year, SNK Playmore would discontinue the AES system, preferring to publish video games in cooperation with Sammy, using its new Adamus Wave arcade board. Shortly afterward, with the final games coming out, the Neo Geo would end its initial reign in 2004. In 2004, SNK Playmore would become officially licensed to manufacture Japanese slot machines, and they would continue to use their intellectual properties on those machines to increase revenue. Although they would never get close to the volume of games that released during their heyday, SNK Playmore would go on to produce arcade games on other arcade platforms not designed by themselves. They also turned their focus to porting some of their previous game library to other systems, such as the PlayStation 2, Nintendo DS, and mobile phones. In 2007, SNK Playmore USA released its first game on the Xbox Live Arcade online platform, titled Fatal Fury Special. SNK Playmore also began supporting Nintendo's Virtual Console service on the Wii, with Fatal Fury, Art of Fighting, and World Heroes being initial offerings. It was through these services that many would finally get a chance to play a lot of the Neo Geo titles on a home console. And it is with these actions that I firmly believe that Neo Geo started getting a resurgence in popularity. The previous generation of gamers were happy to see that they were finally able to play an affordable version of the arcade games they used to play back in the day. However, a new generation of gamers were also discovering these titles for the first time. In 2007, The King of Fighters 11 was released on the PlayStation 2, and in 2009 they would release The King of Fighters 12, which was not as well received until the new King of Fighters 13, which allowed the franchise to live on modern platforms. In December of 2012, SNK Playmore released the Neo Geo X, which was a relaunched mobile Neo Geo platform. It was the first Neo Geo system to be released since the discontinuation of the brand in 2004, but it would be their third Neo Geo handheld device, following the 1999 release of the Neo Geo Pocket Color. The system initially launched as part of a bundle called the Neo Geo X Gold Edition, which included a docking station, arcade stick, and a bonus game card. The docking station is modeled after the original AES console and is used for charging the handheld as well as connecting it to a television, similar to what you would see on the Nintendo Switch years later. The publication Consumer Reports recommended the system for enthusiasts of older games, but criticized the device's video quality on modern televisions. On October 2, 2013, SNK Playmore terminated its licensing agreement with the console manufacturer Tomo, effectively ending production of the Neo Geo X less than a year after its release. Tomo would dispute the termination of their contract, stating that the contract was to be in effect until 2016, and that it performed every obligation to the licensing agreement. There is conflicting information about what actually led to the contract termination, but many seem to think that it was due to disappointment out of the console manufacturer's quality standards.
Dun, 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 dun. Dun, 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 dun.
As part of SNK's 40th anniversary celebration, they released a Neo Geo Mini console, which was a dedicated miniature home arcade console that was designed to look like the initial Neo Geo MVS system, but would include mostly AES versions of the games. The game can be played by itself, or it can be hooked up to an HD television via a mini HDMI port, and the console featured 40 games built in, but everything was accomplished through emulation. In April of 2016, SNK officially dropped Playmore from their name and its corporate logo, and introduced its old slogan, "The future is now," to signify a return to SNK's rich gaming history. It was at this time the company began to shift more towards its game franchises, more so than it had in the past decade. A new King of Fighters, Samurai Showdown, and new games in the Metal Slug series have been announced. The impact and legacy of SNK and the Neo Geo almost cannot be overstated. Several game franchises derived first on the Neo Geo, including Sengoku, the King of Fighters, Last Blade, Super Sidekicks, Art of Fighting, Metal Slug, and several others. And since its discontinuation, the popularity of the Neo Geo seems to continue on. Homebrew on the system, both commercially and privately, seemed to start as soon as the hardware was discontinued. Many hardcore video game collectors consider the Neo Geo one of the holy grails of their collection, and many consider it to be the most challenging console to collect for. Because most cartridges had a limited production run, some of the rarest Neo Geo games can sell for well over $10,000 a piece. The MVS market provides a cheaper alternative to expensive home AES cartridges, and they can be used on the AES through the use of adapters. So in terms of my experience with the Neo Geo, I first learned about this system when I read Stephen L. Kent's The Ultimate History of Video Games, and I was very intrigued by this hybrid arcade and home system. I knew for a fact that back in the day, I would never have been able to afford this. My parents just wouldn't spring that for a console at that time. In fact, the first console I remember my parents getting was the 3-in-1 Nintendo Entertainment System that was heavily discounted towards the end of its life. I was actually kind of surprised that they got the Super Nintendo Entertainment System when it launched, because that just seemed uncharacteristic of my parents not to try to save more money with that. But since then, it's kind of been this mythical, kind of holy grail of console collecting. I've always been on the lookout for one just to see one in person, if not be able to collect it. And for 20 years, I did not find anything more about this system, and I had never seen one in person. That is until of December of 2019, when the Retro Game Store in my area posted that they had one in stock, and it was first come, first serve. I rushed over there as quickly as I could to get it. I got there, the store clerk pulled it out from the case, we tried it out for a little bit, we played a little bit of King of Fighters 94 on it, and I had enough money to cover the entire cost of the system, plus the games they had, so I bought it. And I was very excited to be able to get it. I knew that I wanted to cover it on this channel in huge, in-depth coverage, because nobody that I know personally, at least who's ever told me about it, never had one of these consoles. And it's something that when I tell people about it, they're like, no way did they make an arcade system for your house. And oh, I would have loved to have had that. So it's been a particular thrill for me to be able to get it. The games that I got with it were games like NOM 1975, King of Fighters 94, but that was pretty much it. It was only then that I realized, after getting the system, how expensive it is to collect for it. I assumed there was going to be some around the $100 mark, $200 mark, and that this would be a rare treat for me to get one. Maybe I could ask for ones for Christmas and whatnot. But it wasn't until I tried to collect Metal Slug for the system that I realized, holy cow, is this expensive on a whole nother level. So I knew I was going to have to go on the cheap, and thankfully I learned what the MVS was. When I first bought the Neo Geo AES, I just thought it was called the Neo Geo. I didn't know the MVS was different cartridges for the arcade. I just thought it all ran the same thing and all the games were the same. I also learned that if you get a converter, you can use the cheaper MVS cartridges on your AES, so that's the route I thought I was going to go with this. Trying to go the route of getting a 161 in one cart wasn't as easy either. These cartridges are expensive for the AES as well when compared to their MVS counterparts. So I got an MVS 161 in one cart, and I got a converter so that it would work on my AES, and for the most part I was able to get it working, but each time I had to power off the system and power it back on multiple times to get it to work, and a light bulb clicked off in my head saying I probably shouldn't be torturing my very expensive Neo Geo console like this, so I decided to put that off to the side and I haven't used it since. Maybe if I get a consoleized MVS in the future, I'll be able to use that cartridge and utilize it correctly more often, but for now, I'm not going to risk damaging my AES trying to get that thing to work. So then that left me with the brilliant developers over at Stone Age Gamer who developed the Neo SD cart. This thing is the reason why I've been able to bring you the ultimate Neo Geo review, rather than here are the just 5 or 6 games I've been able to find in the last couple years for it. But another thing that this does that I was not expecting is that it actually gives me access to the North American versions of these games. My console is the Japanese region console, which is cheaper to collect, but it also will display things in Japanese by default unless I modify the BIOS chip. And I have very little interest in doing a hardware modification to the system. I'd like to keep it as stock as I possibly can. But with all that said, with the high price of collecting, the multi-carts that don't really seem to work well on it, and the high expense of getting the Neo SD, I still love getting this system. And in fact, I still do plan to collect cartridges for this game, even though I have access to the full library. It's just the priority has been lowered by a lot. Am I ever going to get that Metal Slug game? Probably not. But I will be able to get a variety of games that I enjoy on this console. In fact, the only thing missing from my collection now is a second Neo Geo, because I would love to sometime be able to showcase that 2-player gameplay where you can have one player playing on one TV and one player playing on another. That would be something I would love to try out, but I mean, it took me 20 years to find the first console. Maybe in another 20 years, I'll be able to show you that when I find the other and another copy of the game to play on it. But with all that said, with all those complications and all those drawbacks, at the end of the day, I still love this console. Having the Neo Geo AES really makes me feel like I have a 1990s arcade unit at my disposal 24/7, and that is an awesome feeling. Especially since I grew up in the 90s, I've played a lot of these games in the arcade, and I've played a bunch of them on the Wii. There is nothing quite like playing it on original hardware and on a CRT. These games look absolutely stunning and fascinating on a CRT. They utilize a lot of tricks that aren't emulated well and don't show up well on modern displays, even with that awesome upscaler that I have, the Retrogaming 5X. And out of everything else, when I see these games on a CRT, especially next to other home consoles of the time, this just blows those experiences out of the water with their constant visuals, high-fidelity graphics, and the sound chip in this console, which I grew very fond of all throughout my playthrough of it. I mean, it's just everything about this system I really like. At the end of the day, though, would I recommend collecting one? Absolutely not. This is definitely very high up there on the hardcore collector's list. The barrier to entry for collecting for this system is quite high. You definitely have to have a lot of resources to invest in the system, not just monetarily, but also skill-wise if things go wrong. In this case, this is going to be one of the few times you hear me say this, emulation is the preferred option for most people to experience this console. And I know with that statement, I've probably made a few enemies out there who were really liking my Neo Geo review, but it's absolutely the truth. Because it is just not feasible for everyone who wants to play these games to get the original hardware. It's a lot less accessible than the more popular game consoles out there. Even the TurboGrafx, which didn't sell as well as like your Super Nintendo or Sega Genesis, that thing is much more accessible than this console is. So in that case, I just can't recommend it for that purpose. At the end of the day, I would have loved to have had one of these back in the day. It was a kid's dream to be able to own one of these back in the day, and I would have loved to have one then. I love having one now. This is a console I will be pulling out probably more frequently than the rest because of its uniqueness, because of that 90s arcade experience that it provides, and I just can't be more happy. I would give the Neo Geo a thumbs up. That said, that does end this video series here, and I am now done with the Neo Geo for the 16-bit war. And before we start the 16-bit war, I have one more system to cover, and that is the Super Nintendo. So stay tuned for that series coming out to you real soon with the Ultimate Super Nintendo review.
If you like this video and you'd like to help out with future projects on this channel, please consider supporting me on Patreon. A special thanks to those Patreons you see on screen. Also, if you like what you see, please remember to leave a like and click that subscribe button on your way out.
As always, I want to thank you all so much for watching, and I will see you all in the next video.